My fingers froze on the first page of the wedding album. There I was. Or rather, wasn't. The family portrait showed my daughter in her $11,000 gown, her husband in his tuxedo, his parents beaming on one side, and on the other, just empty space where I had stood in my blue dress. I'd been edited out of my own daughter's wedding photos, erased from existence, and now she was asking me, "My name is Eleanor Harrington. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter erased me from her life while simultaneously expecting me to fund her future." If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should value you most, subscribe and share in the comments where you're watching from. The leather-bound album felt heavier than it should have, as I sat in my sunlit living room, afternoon light streaming through windows that needed cleaning. Rebecca had arrived unannounced, perfectly timed during the golden hour. A photographer's instinct, I'd passed to her perhaps the only part of my profession she hadn't dismissed as just teaching. It turned out beautifully, don't you think? Rebecca's manicured finger tapped the embossed cover, her wedding date in silver script. James's mother found this incredible photo editor. The lighting in some of those shots was just dreadful. I'd opened the album, with anticipation fluttering in my chest. After 42 years of motherhood, 35 spent documenting school events as Westlake High's photography teacher, I'd been relegated to second-tier wedding photographer at my only daughter's wedding. The professional had captured the important moments, while I was limited to reception candids. I turned the page. Another group shot. I remembered standing beside my late husband's brother, Thomas's only family present. Now the photo showed Rebecca with her arm around empty air. The background blurred where I had been edited out. My throat constricted. The familiar tightening I'd felt at Thomas's funeral 5 years ago. I kept turning pages, my heartbeat quickening with each new erasure. 16 photos. In each one, space where I had stood, smiles directed at an absence, arms around invisible shoulders. "Rebecca," my voice emerged smaller than intended. "I don't understand. I'm not in any of these." She glanced up, the flicker of annoyance crossing her face so quickly I might have imagined it. "Mom, don't make this a thing." The lighting was weird. "You were in shadows." The photographer fade. "It happens sometimes with certain skin tones and older people." Certain skin tones. Older people. The weight of those words pressed against my chest. "Actually," she continued, brightening as she set the album aside, "that's perfect timing. James and I found the perfect house." She pulled out her phone, thumbing quickly through photos of a sprawling Tudor-style home. "It's in Oakwood Hills, near the country club I showed you pictures of. We just need a little help with the down payment." The emotional whiplash left me momentarily speechless. One moment discovering I'd been erased from my daughter's wedding memories, the next being asked to finance her new home. "How much?" I managed, my fingers still resting on the empty space where I should have been. "Just $75,000. Rebecca's voice carried the casual tone she'd used when asking for $20 movie money as a teenager. "The market's insane right now, and we need to move quickly. James's parents are already arranging country club introductions." The cold weight of realization settled in my stomach. I'd been edited out of her past, while simultaneously being expected to fund her future. I gently closed the album, noticing my hand trembling slightly. Thomas had been gone 5 years, but his presence remained vivid in those photographs, untouched, unedited, preserved. My late husband, who hadn't been there to contribute to our daughter's $42,000 wedding, had retained his place in the family narrative. I, still living, still sacrificing, had been removed. "I'll need to think about it," I said, my photography teacher's eye still cataloging the professional precision of my removal from each image. No sloppy editing or obvious cuts, just a clean excision of my existence. "Mom, there's not much time to think. Houses in Oakwood Hills don't stay available." Rebecca's voice sharpened slightly. "Besides, it's not like you're using that money for anything else. You still live in this same house, drive the same car." This same house, where I'd raised her for 42 years, where I'd graded papers at night while she slept, where I'd converted the basement into a dark room and taught her to develop film when she was 7, where Thomas and I had saved every extra dollar toward her college education, $87,000 in tuition alone. "I need some time," I repeated, my voice steadier now. Rebecca sighed, standing up and smoothing her cream-colored slacks. "Designer. If the subtle logo at the pocket was any indication, fine, but we really need to move on this by next week." She gestured at the album. "Keep it. We have a digital copy." How generous, I thought, to give me physical evidence of my erasure. After she left, I sat with the album in my lap, the afternoon sun now casting longer shadows across my living room floor. I opened it again, tracing the empty spaces where I should have been. In the quiet of my home, surrounded by framed photographs I'd taken over decades, evidence of my eye, my skill, my presence, I felt the first flicker of something beyond hurt. A question began forming, unfurling slowly like a print in developing fluid. If my daughter could so easily remove me from her past, why should I finance her future? After Rebecca left, I couldn't stop thinking about those empty spaces where I should have been. Something about the precision of the edit, the professional care taken to remove me suggested this wasn't an isolated incident. I set the album aside and opened my laptop, the screen's blue glow casting harsh shadows across my face in the now darkening living room. With trembling fingers, I found Rebecca's social media accounts. Though we were connected, I rarely checked them, respecting the boundary between her public life and our private relationship. I started with recent photos. Christmas at James's parents' estate. There was Rebecca with her in-laws, James, and my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, 14 and 10, all arranged beside a towering tree dripping with ornaments. I remembered that day vividly, the bite of winter air, as I'd carried my signature cranberry bread across their icy walkway, the 40-minute drive through swirling snow, the warmth of Noah's small hand in mine, as he opened the art supplies I'd carefully selected. But here, in this polished version, I didn't exist. My fingers grew so numb I could barely scroll further. Thanksgiving dinner, family vacation to Bar Harbor, Noah's birthday party. In each case, parallel versions of reality, the events I'd attended, and these carrot images where I'd been removed, like a ghost haunting my own family. "This is ridiculous," I whispered, my voice echoing in the empty room. I heard that slightly higher pitch it always took when I was trying to convince myself of something. The same tone I'd used when telling Thomas his cancer prognosis wasn't that bad. The same tone I'd used when assuring Rebecca I was fine living alone after he died. I closed the laptop and reached for the phone, my chest tight with a need to hear someone else's voice. "Carol? It's Ellie. Do you have a minute?" Carol had been my colleague at Westlake High for 30 years. We'd taught in adjoining classrooms, she English literature, me photography, and had weathered divorces, deaths, and departmental politics together. "For you? I have several. What's going on?" I explained about the wedding album, the missing photos, and the house down payment request. Carol's silence on the other end felt oddly validating, like the first person who believed me when I said something wasn't right. $5,000. She finally said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That's not a down payment, Ellie. That's practically a house in our neighborhood." "It's for Oakwood Hills," I explained, hearing how defensive I sounded. Why was I defending Rebecca's request? Carol's tone sharpened. "Where James's crowd lives. Look, I don't want to overstep, but have you considered that Rebecca might be stretching the truth about their finances?" "What do you mean?" "Well, James makes good money at that investment firm, and Rebecca's interior design business seems to be doing well, at least according to the profile the local magazine did last month." "What profile?" My stomach clenched. Another thing my daughter hadn't shared. Carol's hesitation was brief but noticeable. It was a spread on young professionals. Rebecca's business was highlighted. She did the Winston home renovation. You know, the big colonial on Lakeview. The budget for that project alone had to be in the six figures. My mind raced, connecting dots I'd been too blind to see. Rebecca had told me her business was still getting established. She'd made it sound like they were struggling to make ends meet, especially with the children's private school tuition, $8,500 annually, which I contributed to significantly. "Ellie, there's something else." Carol's voice had that careful quality she used when delivering difficult news to students. "I saw Rebecca and James at Le Bernardin last weekend. My nephew was in town and wanted to go somewhere special. They were ordering the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings. That's easily $1,000 for dinner." My throat constricted so tightly I could barely swallow. That same weekend, Rebecca had canceled our standing Sunday lunch, saying they were watching expenses before the house purchase. "I'm sorry," Carol added quickly. "Maybe they were celebrating something special." "Maybe," I agreed, but a pattern was emerging, becoming clearer with each new piece of information. We chatted a while longer before hanging up. I sat in my darkening living room, the wedding album still open to a family portrait with an Eleanor-shaped hole in it. 3 days later, I found myself driving past Rebecca and James's current home, a perfectly respectable 4-bedroom in Lakeside that they'd repeatedly described as too cramped for their growing needs. I hadn't planned to stop by, but something compelled me to turn into their driveway when I noticed both their cars were gone. Rebecca had given me a key for emergencies years ago. I'd never used it unannounced, respecting their privacy, but today felt different. The house was immaculate, as always. Rebecca's design aesthetic, evident in every carefully staged area. I moved through the quiet space, feeling strangely like a visitor in a museum of my daughter's life. In the kitchen, a stack of mail caught my eye. On top was a statement from a credit card I didn't recognize, one of those black metal cards reserved for high spenders. The envelope was open, its contents partially visible. I hesitated, my hand hovering above it. I'd never invaded Rebecca's privacy before, but I'd also never been systematically erased from family photographs before. The statement revealed purchases that made my heart stutter. A $12,000 home entertainment system purchased last month, designer clothing, weekend trips to New York, expensive restaurants, including Fuo's and $246 at Le Bernardin on the exact date Carol had mentioned. My gaze moved from the statement to the kitchen beyond. The outdated appliances Rebecca had complained about had been replaced with top-of-the-line models. Through the window, I spotted something covered in the driveway. Pulling back the tarp revealed a new luxury car, not yet registered, judging by the temporary tags. The cold weight in my stomach crystallized into something harder. The financial struggles had been fabricated, part of a pattern designed to extract money while minimizing my presence in their lives. I was a bank account, not a mother. A resource, not a person. As I quietly let myself out, I realized I wasn't just being removed from photographs. I was being removed from reality itself, kept around only for what I could provide. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something shifting inside me, a clarity beginning to form around a question I'd never allowed myself to ask. What would happen if I simply said no? That evening, I couldn't sleep. The image of Rebecca's luxury car, hidden under that tarp, kept resurfacing every time I closed my eyes. It wasn't just the deception that bothered me. It was the elaborate nature of it, the careful cultivation of a narrative where they were struggling, where my financial help wasn't just wanted but needed. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded downstairs in my worn slippers. The house creaked familiarly beneath my feet, each sound a reminder of the 42 years I'd lived here. Thomas and I had purchased it when Rebecca was just a baby, stretching our teachers' salaries to provide her with a stable home in a good school district. In the kitchen, I made tea and sat at the table where I'd graded thousands of student photographs over the decades. My gaze drifted to the ceiling, toward the attic access in the hallway. Something was tugging at my memory, something about Thomas's old papers stored in the weathered trunk we'd never quite gotten around to properly sorting after his death. Setting down my barely touched tea, I found myself pulling down the attic ladder, driven by an instinct I couldn't quite name. The musty smell of preserved time greeted me as I climbed into the darkness, flashlight in hand. Thomas's trunk sat in the corner, surrounded by Christmas decorations and boxes of Rebecca's childhood art projects I'd carefully preserved. I knelt before it, feeling the slight creak in my knees, a reminder of the 35 years I'd spent bending over darkroom trays and crouching to find the perfect angle for student sports photographs. The brass key was exactly where I remembered, taped to the underside of the lid in its own small envelope. Inside the trunk lay the artifacts of Thomas's life, his teaching awards, old lesson plans, the manuscript for the history textbook he'd never quite finished. Beneath these, I found a small lockbox I'd never opened, one of those fireproof document containers people use for birth certificates and insurance policies. It required a different key, one I didn't recognize. I was about to set it aside when I noticed it wasn't actually locked. The mechanism had broken at some point, the metal slightly bent. Inside were papers, legal documents mainly, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. The sight of it sent a jolt through me. His handwriting, 5 years since his death, those familiar loops and angles could still make my breath catch. The envelope's seal had weakened with time, coming open easily in my trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before his cancer diagnosis. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something I need you to remember. Rebecca isn't biologically yours, but she has always been your daughter in every way that matters. The paper slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, floating to the attic floor like a leaf detached from its branch. I stared at it, the words visible even in the dim light from my flashlight. Rebecca isn't biologically yours. Of course she wasn't. I'd always known this, known but never spoken it aloud, not even to myself, not in all these years. With shaking hands, I picked up the letter and continued reading. When Sarah abandoned her and disappeared, you didn't hesitate. I'll raise her, you said. She needs a mother. You knew the truth from the beginning, yet you loved her completely. Never once did you use that truth as a weapon or a shield. That's real motherhood, Ellie. Not biology. Choice. I've kept these papers all these years. The original birth certificate with Sarah's name. The adoption paperwork we filed when she was 2 and it became clear Sarah wasn't coming back. The letters from her saying she wanted no part in our lives. I never wanted Rebecca to find these accidentally, to learn the truth in a way that might hurt her. Sometimes I think we should have told her when she was old enough to understand. You disagreed, fearing it would make her feel unwanted or different. You were so determined that she would never question her place in our anguish, never doubt that she was completely and unconditionally loved. I honored your decision, but I've asked myself as I get older, did we do the right thing? Would knowing have made her value the choice you made, the love you gave without biological obligation? If I'm gone and you're reading this, these questions are yours alone now. I trust you to know what's right, as you always have when it comes to loving our daughter. Forever yours, Thomas. The paper trembled in my hands, not just from the weight of its contents, but from the rush of memories it unleashed. I remembered that day standing in the hospital, looking down at the tiny bundle with wisps of dark hair. Thomas confessing through tears about Sarah, the brief affair before our wedding, the baby she didn't want. I remembered the choice I made, not from obligation, but from love. I'll raise her, I had said. And I had. Without reservation, without condition, without ever telling her she wasn't mine. The birth certificate confirmed what the letter said. Sarah Mitchell, mother. Thomas Harrington, father. And later, the adoption papers with my name, legally replacing Sarah's. A strange heat rushed from my chest into my neck and face as I sat surrounded by the documentation of my most profound choice. My vision seemed to sharpen, the dim attic suddenly coming into crystal clarity. I could see the dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight, the texture of the old trunk's leather, the yellow tinge at the edges of these papers that documented a decades-old decision. For 42 years, I had been a mother by choice rather than biology. I had chosen Rebecca, knowing she wasn't mine, and then spent a lifetime making sure she never felt that distinction, compensating perhaps. Overcompensating, certainly. To ensure she never questioned her place or her worth. I had defined my motherhood through sacrifice, through giving, through constant accommodation. And now, sitting in this attic surrounded by the physical evidence of my choice, a new question formed. Had that unconditional love, that determination to never set boundaries for fear they might suggest conditional acceptance, created the entitlement I now faced? The realization didn't arrive with pain but with clarity, sharp, clean, and undeniable. I had spent decades proving my motherhood through sacrifice, as if I needed to earn the title by giving more, asking less, accommodating always. I gathered the papers and slowly descended from the attic, my knees stiff from kneeling on the hard floor. In the kitchen, I spread them across the table where I'd helped Rebecca with homework, planned family vacations, managed household finances, and graded countless student portfolios. The first gray light of dawn was filtering through the windows now, illuminating these fragments of a history I'd helped construct. Not just the papers documenting Rebecca's origins, but the narrative I'd built around our relationship, one where my worth was measured by what I gave up rather than by what I stood for. As the light grew stronger, so did a thought I'd never allowed myself to fully form. Loving Rebecca unconditionally didn't mean I had to accept being treated as nothing more than a financial resource. Being her mother by choice rather than biology didn't mean erasing myself to prove my devotion. For the first time in 42 years, I allowed myself to consider what boundaries might look like in a relationship I'd kept boundary-free. What would happen if the mother who had chosen to give everything now chose to say enough? The thought didn't frighten me as it once might have. Instead, it settled into my chest with the warm weight of a truth finally acknowledged. The next morning, I made an appointment with Janet Winters at Capital Financial Planning. Janet had been our advisor since Thomas's diagnosis, helping us navigate the complexities of insurance, medical costs, and eventually his death. I'd continued working with her after his death, though our meetings had grown less frequent as my financial situation stabilized. "Eleanor," she greeted me warmly, rising from behind her desk. "It's been a while. How are you?" "I'm reevaluating some things," I said, settling into the chair across from her. I noticed my voice sounded different, lower, steadier than the slightly apologetic tone I typically used when discussing money matters. I explained Rebecca's request for the house down payment, careful to stick to facts rather than emotions. Janet listened attentively, making occasional notes, her expression professional but concerned. "And you're considering providing the $75,000? She asked when I finished. "I need to understand what it would mean for my long-term security." Janet nodded and turned to her computer. "Let me pull up your financial profile." Her fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard, bringing up charts and projections I recognized from previous meetings. As she laid out the projections on her desk, something shifted in my posture. I felt my spine straightening, vertebra by vertebra, as if remembering its proper alignment after years of unconscious stooping. The numbers on the page came into sharp focus, not just figures but years of my life, my work, my future. My breathing deepened, each inhale filling my lungs completely for what felt like the first time in months. "Ellie, I need to be very clear," Janet said, looking directly at me. "If you give Rebecca the $75,000, you'll need to work at least 5 more years beyond your planned retirement. Your long-term care options would be significantly limited, but I've always helped her when she needed it," I heard myself say, the words emerging automatically, like a line from a script I'd rehearsed for decades. "There's a difference between helping and harming yourself," Janet replied, her tone gentle but firm. "This isn't just about money. It's about your security and dignity in your later years." I stared at the projections, the stark reality of my financial future laid out in clean, indisputable numbers. "What if I offered half the amount?" Janet's eyes remained steady on mine. That's still putting her wants above your needs. May I ask you something? Would Rebecca make the same sacrifice for you? The question hung in the air between us, and in the silence that followed, I found my answer. No, Rebecca wouldn't sacrifice for me. The realization didn't come with pain or anger, but with clarity, sharp, clean, and undeniable. For decades, I'd been the one accommodating, adjusting, sacrificing. I'd been the one making room while gradually being erased. The thought that formed next surprised me with its certainty. I don't have to continue this pattern. What would you recommend? I asked, my voice emerging from that new, steady place. Janet seemed to notice the shift in me. Her expression softened slightly. Financially speaking, protect your assets. You've worked too hard to compromise your security, especially given the uncertainty of health costs as we age. She pulled out a fresh notepad. Let's look at some facts. You're 68. You've been retired for 3 years after a 35-year teaching career. Your pension is solid but not excessive. Your investments are conservative and performing adequately. You have no debt, which is excellent. I listened as she outlined my financial reality, the careful planning Thomas and I had done, the additional measures I'd taken after his death. It was a picture of modest security, not wealth. The $105,000 Rebecca wanted represented nearly a third of my liquid assets. May I speak candidly? As someone who's worked with many parents in similar situations? Janet asked. I nodded. Children who receive large financial gifts often come back for more, especially when they've established a pattern of living beyond their means. In my experience, these situations rarely involve just one request. The truth of her assessment settled in my chest. This wasn't just about the house down payment. It was about a pattern that would likely continue as long as I allowed it. Thank you, I said, gathering the papers she'd prepared. This has been very helpful. What will you do? She asked. Set some boundaries, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. That afternoon, I called Carol and asked if she could meet for coffee. We settled into a corner table at the local cafe, away from the after-school crowd. You seem different, Carol observed after our initial greetings. Something's changed. I shared what I'd discovered. The hidden luxury car, the expensive purchases, the meeting with Janet, carefully omitting the revelation about Rebecca's biological origins that remained private, a truth that wasn't mine alone to share. I'm not surprised, Carol said, stirring her latte. But I am concerned about how Rebecca will react when you say no. In my experience, people who are used to getting what they want can become difficult when that changes. I've been thinking about that, I admitted. I need to approach this carefully. You need evidence, Carol said firmly. Documentation? Don't make this about feelings or perceptions. Make it about facts she can't dismiss or explain away. The photography teacher in me recognized the wisdom in this. Documentation had been my professional language for 35 years, the tangible evidence of light and shadow, of moments captured and preserved. I understood the power of irrefutable visual proof. Over the next 3 days, I built my case methodically, approaching it with the same care I once took in developing student portfolios. I printed screenshots of Rebecca's social media posts, showing expensive vacations and purchases. I made copies of the credit card statement I'd seen. I gathered records of my financial contributions over the years. College tuition, wedding expenses, grandchildren's school fees. I created a folder with all the evidence, organizing it chronologically. The pattern was undeniable when laid out this way. A systematic exploitation of my generosity, alongside a gradual erasure of my presence. I also consulted with an attorney, something I'd never imagined doing regarding my relationship with my daughter. Barbara Chen, a friend of Janet's who specialized in elder law, reviewed my situation with professional detachment. You have no legal obligation to provide this money, she assured me. And given what you've shown me about your daughter's financial situation, there's no ethical obligation either. What about the grandchildren? I asked, voicing my deepest concern. Could she keep them from me? Barbara's expression softened. She could try, but courts generally recognize grandparent relationships as beneficial to children, especially when there's an established pattern of involvement. You've been actively present in their lives. Dirk? I nodded, thinking of the 1460 Poles school events I'd attended, the countless hours spent helping with homework, the traditions I'd established with Lily and Noah. Document that involvement, Barbara advised. Just in case. But in my experience, threats to restrict access to grandchildren rarely materialize fully. They're usually just leverage. As I left Barbara's office, I felt a strange lightness. The professional educator in me had always valued preparation, and now I was prepared, not just emotionally, but strategically. That evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror studying my reflection with the analytical eye I'd once brought to evaluating photographs. I saw a woman with silver-streaked hair and lines etched, decades of expression, but I also saw something new in my posture, in the set of my shoulders, in the directness of my gaze. For 42 years I'd been Rebecca's mother, first by choice, then by law, always by love. That hadn't changed. What had changed was my understanding of what that role required from me now. Love didn't mean enabling patterns that ultimately harmed us both. It meant having the courage to establish boundaries, even when they might not be welcomed, even when they might be met with resistance or rejection. I picked up my phone and texted Rebecca. We need to talk about the house. Can you and James come over Friday evening? 7 p.m. Her reply came almost immediately. Perfect. We can sign whatever you need then. The assumption in her message might once have made me doubt my resolve. Now it only confirmed that I was making the right decision. The words hung in the air like poison. Why don't you just disappear? My daughter-in-law's face twisted with anger, her finger pointing at the door. My son, my only child, stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding in silent agreement, and said, "We'd be better off without you." Friday evening arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn. I spent the afternoon in deliberate preparation, not just rehearsing what I would say, but creating the physical space for this pivotal conversation. I moved the dining room table aside and arranged 3 chairs in a small triangle in the living room, positioning them so that no one would have the height advantage. On the coffee table, I placed a single folder containing my documentation, a pitcher of water, and 3 glasses. Simple, transparent props for what needed to be a transparent discussion. At precisely 6:58 p.m., Rebecca's luxury car, no longer hidden under a tarp, pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as she and James emerged, her checking her reflection in the car window, him scrolling through his phone until she took his arm. Their body language spoke volumes, the practiced sync of a couple presenting a united front. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Mom," Rebecca greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek that barely made contact. "You look nice. New sweater." "No," I replied simply. "I've had it for years." James extended his hand. "Eleanor, good to see you." I noticed he'd brought his briefcase, sleek, expensive leather that matched his belt, prepared to handle paperwork, no doubt. "Come in," I said, leading them to the arranged chairs rather than the dining room they'd expected. "I thought we'd be more comfortable here." A flicker of confusion crossed Rebecca's face, but she recovered quickly. "Whatever works. We can't stay too long. We have reservations at Bellinate for dinner." The Italian restaurant where a meal for 2 easily exceeded $300. The casual mention of expensive plans before asking me for money would have once sailed past unnoticed. Now it registered as part of a pattern, a subtle reminder of their elevated lifestyle, the social world to which I had never quite belonged. "This won't take long," I assured them as we sat down. Rebecca immediately leaned forward. "So, about the house. The sellers have another offer coming in Monday, so timing is crucial. I brought the gift letter the bank needs you to sign." She glanced at James, who began opening his briefcase. "Before we get to that," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, I'd like to discuss something. Rebecca's smile tightened slightly. Mom, I know you probably have questions, but we really are on a tight timeline with this house. Can we sign the papers first, and then chat? No, I said simply. The single syllable hung in the air between us. Not, I'd rather not, or I don't think so, or any of the softer deflections I typically employed. Just no. Rebecca blinked, her smile faltering. Excuse me? I said no. We need to talk before any papers are signed. I reached for the folder on the coffee table, opening it with steady hands. Rebecca, I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, particularly how it's evolved since your father died. Mom, is this really necessary right now? We have the appointment with the mortgage broker on Monday. Yes, I interrupted, something I'd rarely done in our adult relationship. It is necessary. In fact, it's long overdue. I removed the first document from my folder, a printed screenshot of the wedding photos where I'd been edited out. I'd like to understand why I was removed from your wedding album. Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly. I told you, the lighting was bad on that side. It was a photography decision. As someone who taught photography for 35 years, I find that explanation difficult to accept. I placed the image on the coffee table, particularly when it's part of a pattern. I laid out more screenshots, family gatherings, holidays, celebrations, all with the same conspicuous absence. My methodical arrangement of evidence felt like curating a gallery exhibition, each image building upon the narrative of the previous one. These could be from anywhere, Rebecca said dismissively. Social media isn't real life, Mom. You're right, I agreed, surprising her. Social media isn't real life. Real life is this. I placed the copy of her credit card statement on the table, followed by photographs I'd taken of the hidden luxury car and new kitchen appliances. Real life is claiming financial hardship while spending lavishly. Real life is asking me for $75,000 while concealing purchases like these. James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Eleanor, with all due respect, this feels like an invasion of privacy. I turned to him, meeting his gaze directly. With all due respect, James, asking me to compromise my retirement security while misrepresenting your financial situation feels like an invasion of my trust. I stood before them, the folder of evidence in my hands, no longer trembling. My voice emerged from a place I had forgotten existed, lower, steadier, resonating from my chest rather than my throat. The familiar urge to apologize, to soften, to accommodate their reactions didn't come. Instead, I felt a calm certainty flowing through me, warming my limbs, straightening my posture. I will not be providing the $155,000 for your house down payment, I said clearly. It would compromise my long-term financial security, and more importantly, it would continue a pattern that isn't healthy for any of us. Rebecca's face flushed deeper, her composure cracking. I can't believe this. You've been spying on us? Going through our mail? Taking pictures of our house? I've been gathering evidence to confirm what I suspected, I corrected her. That you've been systematically misrepresenting your financial situation while asking me to sacrifice my security. This is ridiculous. Rebecca's voice rose. We need that money. It's not like you're using it for anything important. This isn't a negotiation, Rebecca, I said evenly. I'm not asking for your permission to make decisions about my own finances. Dad would have wanted, she began. I knew your father better than anyone, I cut in, the words firm but not unkind. Thomas valued respect above all else. He wouldn't recognize the person you've become. You're my mother. Rebecca stood now, her voice sharp with accusation. You're supposed to support me. I am your mother. I agreed, the weight of those words landing differently than they ever had before. By choice, not by obligation. And that choice doesn't entitle you to my retirement fund. The room fell silent. Rebecca stared at me, confusion replacing anger as the meaning of my words registered. What do you mean by choice? She asked, her voice suddenly smaller. I hadn't planned to reveal this truth today. For 42 years, I'd protected Rebecca from it, believing that knowing would hurt her. But standing here now, I realized that the secrecy had protected me too, allowed me to overcompensate to prove my motherhood through endless giving. "You are not biologically my daughter," I said gently. "Your biological mother's name was Sarah Mitchell. She had a brief relationship with your father before we were married. When she learned she was pregnant, she left you with Thomas. I chose to raise you as my own when you were 3 days old. We made it legal through adoption when you were 2. Rebecca sank slowly back into her chair, the color draining from her face. "That's not true. You're making this up because I asked for money." "I have no reason to invent such a story," I said, my voice steady. "I found your original birth certificate in your father's papers last week. I'm sharing this not to hurt you, but because I realize now that my determination to compensate for biology might have contributed to our current situation." "You're lying," Rebecca whispered, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "I have never lied to you about my love," I said. "I chose to be your mother. I wanted to be your mother. I have loved you completely and without reservation for 42. That hasn't changed." James looked between us, clearly unsure how to navigate this unexpected turn. "Rebecca," he said carefully, "maybe we should continue this conversation another time." "No," I said firmly. "We need to establish clarity now. I will not be providing the house down payment. My financial support from this point forward will be on my terms, not yours. If you want a relationship with me, it must be based on mutual respect, not what I can provide materially." Rebecca stood abruptly, tears welling in her eyes. "How convenient that you wait until I need something to tell me I'm not really your daughter." The accusation stung, but I maintained my composure. "I've given you everything for 42 years precisely because I chose to be your mother. I paid $87,000 for your college education. I contributed $42,000 to your wedding. A wedding where you literally erased me from the record. I provide $8,500 annually toward my grandchildren's education. I have never withheld my support, but I am establishing boundaries now, and one of them is that I will not compromise my future financial security." Rebecca grabbed her purse. "Come on, James, we're leaving." James hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Eleanor." "It's okay," I assured him. "This isn't easy for anyone." As they moved toward the door, I said, "Rebecca, I love you. That hasn't changed. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here." She paused in the doorway, not turning back, her voice tight with emotion. "Don't expect to see the kids anytime soon." The door closed behind them with a final sounding click. I stood in my living room, the folder of evidence still in my hand, the weight of decades of unspoken truth finally lifted from my shoulders. The pain was there, sharp and real, but beneath it was something else, the solid foundation of a choice made 42 years ago, and a new choice made today, both born of love, both true to who I was. I returned to my chair, alone in the quiet house, and took a long, deep breath. For the first time in years, I filled my lungs completely, without the constriction of unspoken words or unexpressed boundaries. Whatever came next, I would face it as my complete self, not just as Rebecca's mother, but as Eleanor Harrington, a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. 2 weeks passed without a word from Rebecca. No calls, no texts, no visits with the grandchildren. The silence wasn't unexpected, but it still ached, a dull, persistent pain that accompanied me through quiet mornings and long evenings. I moved through my routines like a ghost in my own life. Watering plants, collecting mail, attending church alone, making excuses for my family's absence. The twins have swimming lessons, I'd say. Rebecca's working on a big project. The lies tasted bitter. At night, memories ambushed me. Rebecca's first steps across this very living room floor, teaching her to read in the window seat, upstairs. Had I failed her somehow, been too generous or not generous enough, loved too fiercely or not fiercely enough. I called my attorney the next morning. Barbara Chen had handled my affairs for decades. I want to update my will, I explained after sharing what had happened. Rebecca will still receive some assets, but I'd like to establish a trust for Lily and Noah's education that Rebecca can't access. And I want to donate a significant portion to the arts program at Westlake High. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca. Mom, you're being ridiculous. We're coming over tomorrow to discuss this like adults. Like adults? After she'd thrown shortbread at me, I texted back, I'm busy tomorrow. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. A week later, Rebecca called again. Her voice was different, less sharp, more hesitant. Mom, can we talk? In person? I agreed to coffee the next day. A public place seemed safer somehow. She was waiting when I arrived at the cafe, looking like she hadn't slept. She noticed my new hairstyle, my different clothes. You look different, she said, as I sat down. I am different, I replied. Rebecca studied me, her expression guarded. Where are you living? We went by the house, and the new owner said you'd moved out weeks ago. I bought a condo near the beach. The beach? Rebecca repeated. You hate the beach. You always said the sand gets everywhere. I've discovered I quite like it, I said, sipping my coffee. A tense silence fell around us. The cafe hummed with normal life while our table felt encased in a bubble of strained emotion. Why? Rebecca finally asked, her voice low. Why would you do this? Do you remember what you said to me, Rebecca? Both of you. She had the grace to look ashamed. We were angry. People say things they don't mean when they're angry. Some words can't be unsaid, I replied. Some wounds don't heal easily. So, this is punishment, Rebecca asked, her eyes flashing. You're punishing us by selling our inheritance. It wasn't yours yet, I reminded her gently. And no, this isn't punishment, it's consequence. When you told me to disappear, something broke in me, but something else awakened. I realized I've spent my retirement years living for your future instead of my present. What about your grandchildren? Rebecca asked, her voice cracking slightly. I've missed them terribly, I admitted. But you made it clear you wanted space from me. We meant less frequent visits, not complete disappearance, Rebecca exclaimed. The twins keep asking where you are. You could have called, I pointed out, any time in the past 6 weeks. So could you, she countered. We stared at each other, the impasse stretching between us. I needed to find out who I am without you, I said finally, without being defined by my role in your lives. And who is that? Rebecca asked, her tone softening slightly. I'm still discovering that, but I know I'm someone who deserves respect, who has dreams beyond being a grandmother, who wants to see the world before it's too late. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I felt judged by you, she confessed, like nothing I did was ever quite good enough. I never meant to make you feel that way, I said. But you did. Your suggestions about the children's education, your helpful tips about housekeeping, the way you'd rearrange things when you visited, like my way of organizing wasn't valid. I hadn't considered it that way. In my mind, I'd been helping. In hers, I'd been undermining. I've made mistakes, I acknowledged. I've overstepped boundaries I didn't recognize existed, and we've been conflict avoidant, Rebecca admitted. Instead of addressing issues directly, we let resentment build until that day. The twins miss you, she added after a moment. They made you cards. They're in the car. Something softened inside me. I'd like to see them. My issues with you have nothing to do with my love for them. Can we start over? Rebecca asked hesitantly. Not with the house. I understand that's done. But with our relationship, I'd like that, I said. But things will be different now. Different how? I won't be available at a moment's notice. I won't rearrange my plans to accommodate yours. I won't offer advice unless asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. I understand, and I need to remember you're my mother, not just the twins' grandmother. that you have value beyond what you provide for us. It wasn't resolution, not yet. Too much had been broken for easy repair, but it was acknowledgement, the necessary foundation for whatever might come next.
So, where do we go from here? Rebecca asked.
I considered the question carefully.
Forward, I said simply. Separately sometimes, together others, but with more honesty than before.